There was a point in time when, if you wanted a cup of coffee, you had to brew an entire pot. You would scoop and measure the grounds, insert the filter, fill the water, press brew, and then wait. It almost felt like a waste if all you wanted was a single cup. And if you were part of a group or a family making that pot of coffee, you got whatever flavor had been chosen. There were no options. The process dictated the experience. Then Keurig came along and asked a different question. What if we thought about coffee one cup at a time? That question changed everything. It made making a single cup not only possible, but easy. It reduced friction. It opened up optionality. You could choose your flavor. You could tailor the experience to the moment. Cleanup became almost effortless. But more than anything, it didn't just improve the process. It changed the underlying model of how coffee worked. There was an assumption embedded in how we made coffee that Keurig questioned. What if coffee didn't have to be brewed one pot at a time, but instead one cup at a time? Once that assumption broke, our entire experience of coffee changed. Today, it's hard to walk into an office that doesn't have a Keurig in the break room. Most homes have one sitting on the kitchen counter. The shift feels obvious in hindsight, but it only happened because someone challenged a deeply embedded assumption about how something had always been done. This week, I read an article by Jack Dorsey titled From Hierarchy to Intelligence. It's long, dense, and at times difficult to follow. But if you are trying to understand what the future of work looks like, whether you're trying to find your place in it, advising clients through it, or actively designing it inside your organization, it is worth spending time with. Because at its core, the article is doing something very similar to what Keurig did. It is questioning an assumption that most of us don't even realize we are operating within. And as I read it, one question stood out. What does your company understand that is genuinely hard to understand? We have built organizations around a simple belief that humans are the mechanism through which information flows. The faster information can move through an organization, the more agile that organization becomes. And so we have designed our companies accordingly. We have functions, teams, reporting structures, and layers of management, all in service of moving information up, down, and across the organization. In many ways, what we've really built are systems, where each person holds a small, partial view of what is happening. No one sees the full picture at once, so we rely on meetings, updates, and layers of management to piece together a version of reality that is good enough to make decisions. You could think of it as a fragmented, constantly reconstructed dashboard of reality, one that only comes into focus through conversation, interpretation, and translation. What Dorsey and the team at Block are doing is bringing that assumption to the surface and asking a different question. What if humans no longer need to be the mechanism through which information flows? And what if, instead of reconstructing reality through layers of conversation, you could operate from a shared, continuously updating view of what is actually happening? My guess is that, whether you have articulated it this way or not, you are already feeling this tension. As a leader, you are likely wrestling with how information moves, where decisions get stuck, and why things take longer than they should. This article offers a window into what it looks like to take that tension seriously and begin to rethink the system itself. This week, I walk through a few signals from the Block article. But before we jump into the signals, let me take a minute to introduce myself if you are new here. My name is Chris Schmelzer, and I serve leaders who recognize the need and understand that the old models of leading and working are no longer keeping up with the pace of change. Every week, I track the subtle signals that a massive reset is coming for what we refer to as white-collar work, and share thoughts on how to lead yourself and your organization through the age of accelerating change. Here are 4 points from Jack Dorsey's article this week that point to this massive shift. The first point from the article: the history of organization structure. To understand where this might be going, it is helpful to first understand where our current model came from. For thousands of years, organizations have been trying to solve the same fundamental problem. How do we coordinate large groups of people? The Romans approached this problem through hierarchy. They observed that one person, could effectively manage somewhere between 3 and 8 people, and they structured their military accordingly. 8 soldiers formed a small unit, because that is how many could share a tent. Multiple units formed larger groups, and those groups formed even larger ones, creating layers of coordination that ultimately allowed thousands of people to operate together. Each layer existed to aggregate information from below and pass direction from above. That same logic carried forward through history. Military structures evolved to include distinctions between line roles, which executed the mission, and staff roles, which supported planning and coordination. This thinking eventually moved into business, particularly during the expansion of the railroad system in the United States, where managing complexity across distance became a matter of survival. Later, Frederick Taylor refined the system further by breaking work into specialized, repeatable tasks, optimizing for efficiency within this hierarchical structure. Every organizational model we use today is built on this foundation, and underneath all of it is a single constraint. Humans are relatively slow at processing and moving information, which means something important that often goes unnoticed. Our organizations are not just structures of people. They are mechanisms for assembling a version of reality, slowly, imperfectly, and often with distortion along the way. A dashboard of reality that only comes into focus through layers of conversation. What makes the moment we are indifferent is that this constraint is breaking. For the first time, the systems we use to do work can process, update, and distribute information faster and more consistently than humans can. Which raises a fundamental question. If organizations were designed to compensate for the limits of human information processing, what happens when those limits no longer apply? The signal. Organization structure is a result of trying to coordinate the flow of information across groups. The second point from the article, the flow of information. One of the clearest ways to understand what Block is proposing is to look at how different the system becomes when reality itself is continuously visible. Block is building toward a system where everyone, from engineer to executive, operates from the same real-time view of reality, instead of updates living in slide decks, meeting notes, or someone's interpretation of what's happening. The system itself continuously reflects reality. What's being built, what's blocked, what's shipped, what's changing with customers, visible without asking, without waiting, without a meeting to reconstruct it, which starts to change the organization in subtle but important ways. Fewer status meetings, less time spent preparing updates, less reliance on layers of interpretation. The work doesn't need to be translated. It's already visible. In that kind of system, information doesn't need to travel. It doesn't need to be summarized. The dashboard itself becomes the source of truth. If that becomes true, it has significant implications for how organizations are structured. The traditional role of management has largely been to move information, provide context, and coordinate across teams. If a shared, real-time dashboard of reality can do that more effectively, the need for that layer begins to change. The signal. Hierarchy exists because information used to move slowly. AI removes that constraint completely. The third point from the article. 3 types of roles in the future. In the model block is exploring work organizes around 3 types of roles. There are individuals who build, referred to as individual contributors, ICs. These are engineers, designers, researchers who operate with direct access to that shared dashboard of reality. They no longer need to wait for context to be passed down or clarified in meetings. They can see what is happening and act accordingly. There are individuals who take responsibility for specific problems or outcomes. These are referred to as directly responsible individuals, DRIs. These are not fixed roles tied to a function, but fluid ownership that shifts as the underlying reality shifts. As the dashboard changes, so does the focus. And there are individuals who continue to build while also developing others. Player coaches are focused on craft, their deep expertise, and the growth of people, not coordination and control. What begins to fall away is the traditional middle layer whose primary function has been to gather, interpret, and redistribute information, to build, in pieces, a version of reality others can act on. This isn't a painless shift. It means entire layers of experienced people whose value was built around moving, interpreting, and coordinating information will need to fundamentally redefine what they do. The signal. Traditional middle management disappears completely because the job of moving information AI does better, faster, and more accurately than any human. The fourth point. The most important question. At the center of all of this is a question that feels increasingly important for any leader to sit with. What does your company understand that is genuinely hard to understand? If the answer is not much, then the introduction of AI will likely show up as a cost story. You will use it to become more efficient, reduce headcount, and improve margins in the short term. But over time, that efficiency will not be enough to differentiate you. If the answer is deep, something different happens. You begin to build a system that gets better over time because it is grounded in a unique and continually evolving understanding of reality. Your dashboard of reality becomes more accurate, more predictive, and more valuable with every interaction. In the past, value was created through people, structure, and process. Increasingly, value will come from how well an organization can build and operate from its own shared dashboard of reality. Here's what I believe. We are moving toward a world where the primary job of organizations is no longer to move information, but to collectively see clearly. And the organizations that win will not be the ones that adopt AI the fastest, but the ones that build the most accurate, real-time understanding of their own reality and act from it. The signal. If your company doesn't understand something deeply, AI will expose that quickly. If you are curious about the perception of your own language, let's hear from this week's sponsor, Anicha. Anicha is an AI tool that analyzes your real conversations and gives you feedback on how you're actually showing up. Not how you think you are, but what the data shows. It looks at patterns like generative versus constrictive language, talk time versus listen time, questions versus statements, clarity versus abstraction. So you can begin to see the patterns that are shaping your conversations and your outcomes. Sign up to start analyzing the hidden patterns in your language at web.anicha.app. This brings us back to the original idea. Keurig didn't just make coffee faster. It changed the assumption that coffee had to be made in batches, and in doing so, it changed the entire system. What Dorsey and Block are pointing to is a similar shift. For thousands of years, we have built organizations on the assumption that people are required to move information. If that assumption no longer holds, then it's not just that organizations will become more efficient. It's that the very way they are designed will begin to change. And that is a signal worth paying attention to. If there is a place to begin with all of this, it's not by asking how to adopt AI. It's by starting to examine how information actually flows inside your own organization. And one of the most accessible ways to see that is through the meetings you are already in. Every meeting exists for a reason, and that reason is almost always tied to information. But if you begin to look more closely, something starts to become clear. Most meetings are not about the work itself. They are about reconstructing a version of reality so the work can move forward. In other words, most meetings are an attempt to rebuild a dashboard of reality that no one can see all at once. And that is the pinch point, because this entire mechanism is about to change. What happens when the purpose of the meeting, which historically has been to gather, interpret, and distribute information, is no longer necessary? What happens when a shared, real-time dashboard of reality exists, where what is happening with your customers and across your teams is continuously visible, not summarized, not reported, not filtered, just there? The conversations I keep having with leaders right now are centered around workflows. How can AI help us move faster? How can it make this process more efficient? Those are fair questions, but they are not the most important ones. The shift is not about workflows. It is about how reality itself is surfaced and shared. If you want to begin engaging with this shift, start here. In your next meeting, don't just participate, Observe. What is the purpose of this meeting? What role are you playing? What role are others playing? What information is being moved, translated, or reconstructed? And then ask yourself, if a shared dashboard of reality existed, would this meeting still need to happen? The future of work will not be defined by how well we integrate AI into our workflows. It will be defined by how quickly we move beyond the need to reconstruct reality in the first place. Start there. Ask your leadership team what your company understands that is genuinely hard to understand. The answer will tell you more about your AI readiness than any technology assessment will. Because the organizations that learn to see clearly before everyone else does will make this shift feel obvious in hindsight.